The French court had learned to hide their reactions well, but nothing could prepare them for the sickness that seemed to follow Catherine de' Medici wherever she walked. Even the bravest courtiers, men and women who had stood calmly beside dying kings and bleeding soldiers, now approached the Queen Mother with scarves held tightly over their noses. The elegant princess from Florence, who once moved through royal halls like a symbol of grace, now carried a smell so strong that chroniclers later said it felt like breathing in decay itself. Her breath did not drift softly like ordinary air. It came out in thick waves, heavy enough to make candle flames shudder. What happened to her body, and how that slow collapse turned into one of the most whispered legends in European history, is a story buried inside old medical notes, anxious letters sent between ambassadors, and frightened comments from royal physicians who described her condition in Latin because they were too afraid to write it plainly. Catherine de' Medici became known as a woman whose body betrayed her from within, a queen whose rise to power was matched only by the hidden sickness eating at her mouth, her stomach, her lungs, and finally her mind. If stories like this fascinate you, join Rotten Ages and tell us your city in the comments. Now breathe deeply, if you dare, and step back with me into the shadows of the French court, the air inside. Catherine de' Medici's private rooms had grown so heavy and unpleasant that even experienced members of the court entered with scented fabrics pressed against their faces. The woman who had once been celebrated for her beauty and charm now carried an odor so strong that writers compared it to the smell of something spoiled. It did not slip out quietly, it pushed forward in thick bursts that made candles tremble when she breathed out. In the next moments, you will learn the medical clues and historical records that explain how one of Europe's most powerful queens gained a reputation for a level of bodily decay so severe that ambassadors mentioned it in letters. Poets mocked it in secret verses, and her doctors wrote about it in nervous Latin. This is the hidden story of Catherine de' Medici's slow inner collapse. To understand how she became known for this living cloud of sickness, we must return to the early days of her life in France, when her authority was still uncertain and her health still intact. Because, despite her fame for poisons, political games, and dark astrology, the torment that shaped her final years did not come from her enemies. It came from a silent corruption growing inside her own mouth and stomach. If you enjoy these dark histories, subscribe to Rotten Ages and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let me take you back in time. Picture the French court in the late 1550s. The Louvre, still partly a medieval fortress, echoed with the footsteps of servants rushing through cold stone corridors. Catherine, now queen consort, after the death of King Henry II, walked through these halls with calm confidence, shaped by years of being ignored, doubted, and pushed aside. There had been a time when she was believed to be barren, unimportant, a foreign wife overshadowed by Diane de Poitiers, the king's influential mistress. But after Henry's death, as her sons began taking the throne one after another, Catherine stepped fully into the role she had been waiting for, Queen Mother, a position of immense power. She was determined to guide France with a strength no one could question. Yet even as she grew stronger in politics, something deep inside her body began to fall apart. It started with a simple toothache, a swelling along the gums, a strange metallic taste each morning. She struggled to chew the sugar-coated almonds she adored, treats from Florence that reminded her of her childhood. The pain sharpened day by day. Her doctors tried everything they knew: vinegar compresses, herbs, cloves, fennel seeds. Warm oils massaged along her cheeks, but the trouble was already spreading under the surface. Infection was quietly carving out abscesses beneath her teeth, hollowing spaces along the root stop. By 1562, foreign envoys were no longer discussing her policies or her influence over France's future. Instead, they whispered about her breath. A Venetian ambassador wrote that her words came out through a foulness so strong I struggled to endure it. A Florentine representative reported that the Queen Mother carried the smell of decay, something that clung to the air long after she finished speaking. At first, the court tried to dismiss the remarks as political insults, but those closest to Catherine knew otherwise. When she spoke, the air thickened. When she laughed, people instinctively leaned back. Her ladies began carrying small bouquets to hold near their faces. Musicians quietly shifted several steps farther away during performances. Even Catherine herself, always quick to notice changes in mood, sensed the sourness in her own breath. Anxiety settled into her mind, pushing her toward desperate attempts to hide it. That was when her obsession with perfumes began. She purchased more Pomander little golden spheres filled with amber, musk, and jasmine than any queen before her. She ordered the palace floors to be washed with rose water. Her gowns were soaked in orange blossom and bergamot oils. Her pillows were stuffed with lavender. But no matter what she tried, nothing covered the truth. The infection inside her gums deepened as pockets of pus formed beneath her tongue. Her teeth, weakened by years of sugary indulgence, loosened and darkened. Surgeons were called in to cut and drain the abscesses. During one procedure, when a surgeon sliced into a swollen pocket, a burst of yellow fluid sprayed out with such a strong odor that two attendants vomited. Where they stood, Catherine, embarrassed and furious, ordered them to leave. Though she had already seen the horror in their faces, still, she forced herself to continue with her duties. She negotiated with Protestant leaders, arranged the marriages of her children, and guided France through rising tensions. But the damage inside her body refused to stay contained. By 1570, she suffered from violent waves of acid rising into her throat, burning the already infected tissues. Each episode intensified the smell, now a mixture of rot and sourness so sharp that courtiers whispered she could wilt flowers just by speaking. Her digestion faltered. She shook with nausea. Her appetite shifted wildly. Some days she devoured candied fruits as if seeking comfort, and on others she could barely swallow broth. Yet Catherine refused to appear weak. She commissioned new portraits showing her as controlled, firm, and untouchable. She held banquets she could hardly eat at. She moved through her palace with her head high, silks sweeping behind her, leaving clouds of perfume that failed to hide the sickly odor following her like a dark shadow. Historians usually describe Catherine de' Medici as a mastermind of political violence, a queen who shaped wars, alliances, and tragedies like the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. But very few talk about the private battle she faced, one that slowly ate away at her mouth, throat, stomach, and eventually her mind. By the mid-1570s, a quiet but undeniable change had begun to affect how the court viewed her. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a slow piling of physical struggles that no ceremony, costume, or perfume could fully hide. Though she remained powerful and respected, her body was weakening in ways everyone around her noticed. Reports from Venetian and Spanish ambassadors, men trained to choose their words carefully, described how Catherine found it harder to stand through long audiences. The meetings she once handled with ease had to be shortened. Travel, which had long been a major part of ruling a divided kingdom, now left her exhausted. These envoys noted how she paused during conversations, not because she was thinking, but because rising waves of stomach acid burned her throat, or because her swollen gums throbbed with pressure. They saw her shift her jaw in small, involuntary movements, trying to relieve pain. They observed how she sometimes put a gloved hand to her cheek as if overwhelmed by the constant ache under her skin. And they noticed something else after moments of effort or strain. The sickly sweetness in her breath grew stronger, a clear sign of deep inflammation inside her body, something doctors at the time could not yet explain. Even though the royal court followed strict rules of etiquette, people still noticed everything. Servants whispered that the Queen Mother increasingly asked for chairs during ceremonies, where she once stood proudly for hours. They said she preferred smaller rooms for audiences so she could sit without breaking protocol. They noticed she slept later than before, rising tired and dismissing her attendants earlier in the night, blaming fatigue. Her ladies, who saw her without the heavy jewels and rich fabrics, wrote that her nights were restless. She coughed often, and the acid rising into her throat forced her to sleep half upright. Her appetite shifted wildly. Some days she ate too many sweets and pastries, seeking energy or comfort. Other days she ate almost nothing, saying it felt like fire when she swallowed. Travel became one of her greatest challenges. Catherine insisted on continuing her long journeys across France, believing her presence could calm the violent religious tensions between Catholics and Huguenots. But these trips, once symbols of unity, now showed her vulnerability. Letters describe carriages stopping often so she could steady her breath or soothe the burning in her chest. Whole routes had to be changed quietly because rough roads or cold winds were too harsh for her worsening health. One Venetian ambassador wrote that she arrived at a council meeting pale and breathing heavily, but still negotiated for 3 hours, stubbornly refusing to rest even as pain was clear on her face, despite her growing difficulties. Catherine chose concealment, not retreat. She demanded stronger perfumes to hide the smell she hoped no one noticed. She ordered gowns with stiff bodices that forced her to sit straight, hiding the swelling in her abdomen. Her ladies burned rosemary and juniper so often that the smoke clung to the walls. But none of these efforts erased the truth. Her voice, which once carried power across a room, weakened. Constant irritation from acid had made it raw and hoarse. She paused often to sip warm herbal drinks meant to soothe the wounds inside her throat. Chroniclers recorded that she sometimes spoke so softly that ministers had to lean in something many dreaded because of the smell that accompanied her breath. Diplomats learned to angle their bodies away, a subtle gesture Catherine certainly recognized. What the court witnessed was not a single dramatic moment, but a slow erosion of body pushed past what it could endure. Catherine, once known for her iron self-control and physical stamina, was now fighting battles inside her own skin. And yet she still served as the force holding France together. Even as the effort drained the last of her strength, her worsening stomach troubles soon grew into something she could no longer hide. Her digestion fell into chaos. Food no longer nourished her, it hurt her. Some meals left her doubled over with cramps. Other days her belly swelled so tightly that she described feeling inflated from the inside, as though something were pressing outward beneath her ribs. Her doctors did not understand the cause. They only saw the results: unpredictable swelling, violent cramps, and sudden belching that released a sharp, foul smell strong enough to make attendants pull back instinctively. Catherine tried to hide her face during these episodes, pretending to study a tapestry or adjust her clothing. But the embarrassment cut deeply. Her bowels swung between extremes. At times she suffered from harsh purging that left her weak and trembling. Other times she endured days of painful constipation. Surgeons tried crude enemas. Herbalists gave her mixtures of senna, rhubarb, and licorice. Nothing returned her body to balance, and still, despite all of this, she pushed forward determined to rule, determined to appear strong, determined to maintain the image of a queen unbroken. The queen's hands, once steady and graceful, began to shake without warning. They trembled when she lifted a cup, when she signed documents, even when she made small gestures during council meetings. Letters from this period show the change clearly. Her writing, once smooth and elegant, turned uneven, with sharp angles and blots of ink where her fingers twitched. Still, Catherine refused to let her weakness show. She insisted on full ceremony, even on days when she could barely stand. She ordered her ladies to dress her in heavy gowns and jewels before receiving ambassadors. Her attendants tightened her corset over a stomach swollen with trapped fluids. They covered her face with powders to hide the discoloration spreading under her skin. They filled her hair with perfume strong enough to drift down the hall. But none of this masked the smell rising from her breath. The acid that had eaten through her throat had begun affecting her voice as well. Once strong and commanding, it now came out thin and strained, sometimes barely more than a whisper. Ministers leaned closer to hear her, but they regretted it immediately. The air around her mouth felt warm, thick, and sour, something that clung to their skin long after the meeting was over. Ailing kidneys. Her urine grew dark. Her arms developed weeping rashes. She sweated constantly, and the odor matched the bitterness on her breath. Nights became her worst enemy. Her attendants wrote that she woke gasping, clawing at her throat. Convinced the air was pressing down on her chest, she begged for windows to open, then screamed the cold was killing her. Her mind, once sharp and calculating, slipped between clarity and fear. These were signs of a body overwhelmed. Modern Medicine would call it poisoning from within. The worst moment came when the surgeons finally decided they had to remove one of her teeth, a tooth that had become a hollow cave of infection. The operation happened at dawn. The room was filled with burning incense in an attempt to hide the odor. The surgeon pulled once, then again, and finally tore the tooth free. What came out was not just a tooth, but a dripping mass of pus, blood, and rotted tissue. The smell burst through the room with such force that the surgeon dropped his tools and stumbled back, choking. Catherine fainted on the spot. When she woke, she ordered the tooth to be burned so no one would ever see it again. By now, her breath had become a matter of warning. Ambassadors were quietly told to prepare themselves before meeting her. Some wrote that they held their breath until they felt faint. Others said the audience with her felt more like a trial than an honor. But still, Catherine pushed forward. She remained a queen in every way except her failing body. Her words carried the scent of approaching death, and those around her understood something dreadful was building. The shadows of her sickness were growing longer, and everyone at court knew the darkest days had not yet arrived. By the winter of 1588, everyone at court had grown used to the strange rhythm of Catherine's decline. Her illness no longer surprised anyone. It was simply part of life inside the Louvre. Her private rooms were always filled with thick incense. The ceilings were stained from constant burning. Attendants could only stay for short periods because the air became too heavy to breathe. Her breath, once just unpleasant, had grown truly unnatural. What had started as gum disease had turned into full body decay. Every organ struggled. Her kidneys weakened. Her liver swelled. Her stomach no longer digested food normally. Whatever she ate seemed to rot inside her, sending up gases that burned her chest before rising into her breath. Her skin began to betray her as well. Yellow patches appeared along her jaw. Her lips cracked and bled. Dark veins showed beneath the surface of her cheeks, reminding attendants of a corpse more than a living queen. Her eyes sometimes drifted toward corners of the room, as if she were watching shapes no one else could see. Her mind flickered between sharp moments and deep confusion. At times she discussed politics clearly, then suddenly whispered that shadows were speaking to her. She called out for her long-dead husband, saying she could smell him nearby. She accused servants of trying to suffocate her. She prayed constantly until her voice broke into a weak, wheezing sound. Nights became terrifying. Her ladies wrote that she often woke choking, fighting for air, shaking so violently the bed itself rattled. She begged for fresh air, then screamed the cold would kill her. Her breath filled the room with a heavy sweetness, the smell of a body drowning in its own toxins. Today, doctors would call it terminal sepsis. Her contemporaries called it divine punishment. Yet, even with her body failing in so many ways, Catherine did not step back from power. She still attended councils, still gave commands, still tried to hold France together as it fell deeper into chaos. By 1589, Catherine looked far older than her 69 years. Her body was swollen with trapped fluid. Her ankles puffed so much they hardly looked human. Her fingers curled inward from constant inflammation. Her belly stretched tight and shiny, like overripe fruit. She sweated without stopping, and the smell that rose from her skin matched the sour odor of her breath. Still, she did not leave politics. France was breaking apart: civil war, assassinations, rebellion, and Catherine, even in her ruined state, tried to hold the kingdom together. It was almost unbelievable that she could still function. Then came the moment her body finally gave in. On January 5, 1589, she attended a meeting about the siege of Paris. Witnesses said she looked unusually pale. Her breathing was shallow, and her voice barely carried through the cloth she held over her mouth. She said a great weight pressed on her chest. Suddenly, a violent cough shook her whole body. Blood spotted her handkerchief. The room froze. Catherine brushed their concern aside, but the damage was done. Within hours, fever took over. She shook with chills as attendants carried her to her bed. Her breath became so overpowering that dozens of candles were lit just to soften the odor. Doctors paused at her doorway before entering, bracing themselves. Her pulse fluttered. Her eyes rolled upward. She tried to speak, but produced only wet, rattling sounds. Her lips were moistened with wine and honey, but she couldn't swallow any more. The infection had reached her lungs, and everyone knew the end was near. In her final hours, Catherine drifted in and out of confusion. She called for her children, though none came. She prayed, switching between Italian, French, and Latin. At one moment she sat up suddenly, staring at the foot of her bed as if she saw someone standing there. She whispered, "The shadows have arrived." Soon after, her breathing became uneven, each breath slower, heavier, and filled with the thick smell of a body giving up. A priest held a crucifix to her lips, but she turned away, as if even the sacred oil felt suffocating. At around 1 in the afternoon, Catherine exhaled one last long breath. Those present said the room seemed to sigh with her. She died propped upright on pillows, her mouth half open, releasing one final trace of the odor that had followed her for decades. But even death did not quiet the decay inside her. Within hours, the smell from her body grew stronger. Candles dimmed around her. Servants whispered that she was rotting before burial. Surgeons worked quickly, their eyes watering behind scented cloths. Inside her body, they found swollen organs, darkened tissues, and lungs damaged by years of infection. The decay in her mouth had spread deep into her throat and chest. Her breath, her lifelong torment, had truly been the sign of death growing inside her. Afterward, the court tried to rewrite her story. Public announcements said she died peacefully. Portraits showed her calm and untouched. Priests spoke of her faith, but the truth survived in letters, diaries, and hidden medical notes. Catherine de' Medici, Queen Mother of France, a woman who built and shaped kingdoms, spent her last years trapped inside a body slowly destroying itself. The scent that followed her, the scent everyone feared, was simply the final reminder that even the most powerful flesh can decay. In the end, she did not leave behind the perfume she loved so much, but the unmistakable smell of a life consumed from within.